For my movie review, I decided to review the movie Crash. So the main characters in the film, there's a lot. There is Gene Cabot and Rick Cabot, and they are husband and wife. There's Detective Graham Waters, who investigates recent murders based on racial tendencies, and his partner Rhea. There's John Ryan, who is a police officer at LAPD, and his partner, Officer Tom Hansen. There is Cameron Thayer, who's a TV director, and his wife, Christine Thayer. There is Anthony, who is a carjacker. His partner, who is also a carjacker. They kind of like word him as Peter's his partner. Peter's the more laid back one, and Anthony's kind of like the uptight one. And Daniel Ruse, who is a locksmith. So, when the film begins, it kind of shows each character at different times in the movie. So there's a bunch of different scenes. So we first see Detective Waters and Rhea in a car crash at the scene of the murder that they are investigating. It turns racial real quick between Rhea and the other woman, and that kind of sets the movie off as you can tell like that's what it's about. Like the racial tendencies after 9/11 and all that happened. Then it shows Anthony and Peter walking out of a restaurant, and Anthony sees Gene Cabot and Rick Cabot, and they're on the street. And once Gene sees Anthony, Anthony and Peter, who are people of color, she pulls herself closer to her husband to like protect herself in fear. And so Anthony notices that, and he like tells Peter like, oh, they're stereotyping us to be bad people, like we don't look like bad people. And then like Peter's like, oh, we're not scared because we got guns, and then they carjack the car. So then we go back to Gene and Rick's house when they're trying to figure out who did this, and when they're doing this, their locks are also getting changed because of what just happened, and Gene sees that the locksmith is Hispanic. She then raises this big commotion about how she wants the locks changed again in the morning, saying that he's a gang member, that he has tattoos, and how she also goes on a rant to say how she knew something bad was going to happen when she saw the Peter and Anthony walking down the street because they are black, and she didn't want to be racist for turning the other way, and she's like, look what happened because I didn't do that, like we got robbed, and she blames it on that. And then Rick states that to fix this problem for the sake of his voters, he needs a picture of him pinning a medal on a black person to keep the black majority vote. And when he suggests one person, his assistant like tells the man, oh, like the man you're thinking of is Iraqi. And then Rick says, great, that's what I need, is a picture of me pinning a medal on an Iraqi named Saddam. So you can see like this movie is like full of like different racial tendencies, and it shows how that is through different people's lives in LA. So to keep going, when we first see Officer Ryan, he's on the phone talking with someone at the clinic for his father. He's upset with the call because he's not getting the information that he wants to hear, but the lady at the clinic is trying to reason with him. And she's like telling him to come in for their normal times to help. He then asks for her name. He asks to speak with her supervisor, and she's like, I am the supervisor. So he asks her name, and she says, Shaniqua Johnson. He says, Shaniqua, big effing surprise that is, and then hangs up the phone. She hangs up the phone because she's obviously done with it. So then it shows, after that, it shows Ryan and his partner, Hansen, who pull over Christine and Cameron Thayer, who are coming from home from a night out. And Christine was a little intoxicated, but Cameron, who was driving, wasn't at all. And Ryan then makes Cameron come out and do the sobriety test. And when he does this, Christine gets upset because he hasn't been drinking, and so she blames him on how it's like people of color and how Ryan's just doing this because of that. And Ryan says ma'am, and then she's like, don't call me ma'am, like I'm not ma'am. So then Ryan grabs them both and like violently puts them against the car, and then Ryan molests Christine in front of her husband, and while they're doing like the search, and he tells them they could either go to jail or get let off with a warning. And Cameron apologizes, then asks for a warning, which makes Christine very upset, as she should be, and she's very shaken up over what just happened. And also, Officer Hansen is also left in shock, like he like couldn't believe that his partner just did that. So, what are the goals and what do the main characters want throughout this film? Jean and Rick want to find out who did this to their car, but they also want to uphold his voters and outlook on him while it's all going down. Detective Grams and Rhea want to solve this one case that is caused by racial discrepancies. Officer Ryan wants to help his dad, but he also takes out his anger of people of color and uses his power as an officer to do that. There's another scene where he sees Shaniqua in person, and when she says there's nothing else she can do for him, he gets extremely angry and says, "I can't help but look at you and think of 5 other white men who are qualified to do your job that didn't get it." Which, it's obviously not good, and so that's kind of how he portrays himself throughout the entire variety of the film, as being this person who is racist. Officer Hansen's goal is to get a new partner because he is done with Officer Ryan. He's over it. Cameron and Christine are in a fight, and Christine wants Cameron to be more of a man and stick up for himself, and her, because he gets told what to do all the time by people who think they are better than him just because they are white. Anthony and Peter's goals are to carjack cars for profit, and Daniel Ruse, the locksmith, his goal is to literally just do his job and try to do the best for his daughter and wife. So focusing on Officer Ryan, the traumatic scene that causes him to become deviant is when he has that first phone call that we see, is when he has that first phone call with Shaniqua Johnson that triggers his fuel. And that's when he starts taking we see him taking his anger out on people of color because he's upset his father isn't getting the right treatment. He's the one taking care of his sick father, and he's now who is practically dependent on Ryan. And then in one scene, which kind of flashes back to how he could have become deviant, is when he goes in to talk to Shaniqua, and he says how his father used to own his own business and hired all African Americans and treated them fairly when no one else would. And then the city council came out with minority-owned companies' preference in city contracts, which caused his father to lose everything, his business, his home, and his wife. And he says, my father doesn't blame you people. So you can kind of tell that Ryan had this hatred, like he grew this hatred on himself. His father doesn't seem to blame anyone on it, but from what you can assume that Ryan dealt with growing up with watching his father lose his business, is now he has developed that hatred for people of color, so now he's taking out all those frustrations on them because of something the city did bad, pretty much. So the mindset that he's in, he is terrible. He is incredibly rude, he's racist, and he uses power as an officer to belittle people. And the crime that he commits is assaulting Christine Thayer, but he also commits like more little hate crimes, and he's an officer, which he really should not. His job is to protect. And so the psychological studies on the characters of the film. So there's different factors that play a role in why Officer Ryan acts like this. The first one is PTSD in cops, and PTSD in cops is more common than you would think. In a study in May 2018, it was shown that 15% of officers in the U.S. experience symptoms of PTSD. And when talking about PTSD in the workforce with police officers, It can mess your decision-making skills while your ability to react. So there are many different ways people can cope with this. Some do substance abuse, alcohol abuse, but in this case, Officer Ryan takes the aggression route. And his PTSD is triggered by what he went back with watching his father fail, and now the lack of sleep and responsibility of caring for his father, and not to mention what he sees on the job. So he is also someone that uses women to get ahead, as we could see in the scene where he assaults Christine because he knew what he was doing to her would get to Cameron, and he didn't care about his actions toward Christine at all. All he did was, it was basically for his satisfaction. And so the victims are Christine Thayer and Shaniqua Johnson. And you could say that Cameron was also a victim because of this, because of that, how he felt watching his wife go through that, but it was mostly his wife that was the victim out of the two. So the victims are shown of not deserving the crimes at all that were committed against them. Christine Thayer was simply driving home with her husband after a night out. It looked like just like a nice dinner, and they were literally just driving home. He was not intoxicated. Nothing was happening. And Shaniqua Johnson was just literally just doing her job. And so Officer Ryan was shown as making that choice to do these crimes or not. Because he has multiple times where his partner also tells him, like, Christine, when they first go to pull him over, they were like, this isn't the cop we're looking for. And his partner also tells them that Christine and Cameron aren't doing anything wrong, but Ryan still does it. He made those choices to assault Christine and hurt Shaniqua and give her trouble because he was being racist and she was just doing her job. So, Christine definitely shows emotional disturbances after being the victim. She was very taken aback and humiliated by the actions Officer Ryan did to her, and how her husband did nothing to stop it. And she was so disturbed by what happened that in one scene where she was actually in a car and she was stuck and she couldn't get out and it was on fire, Officer Ryan was the only person at the scene, and she was literally scared of him, not even scared of burning in the car. It had seemed like she would rather been stuck in the car that was burning than have him be near her. And you can see that put an emotional damage on her. And so, what kind of other actions could have been taken instead of Officer Ryan becoming deviant? Instead of him becoming deviant, he could have followed in his father's footsteps and just accepted people for who they were. And then recognizing that this hatred has fueled over because of something else, and he should have gotten therapy and stuff before even getting out into the field because he is an officer. Instead of taking out on other people. But yeah, that is my review on Crash.